Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Wednesday Three Martini Lunch. Got to tell you up front, they're all crazy, though. However, we are brought to you today by Earnest, and that's definitely good news. So, Jim, let's get to crazy number one, and it's actually a double-fisted crazy, which could possibly be easily confused for a bad. First of all, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has found out that more than 752,000 Georgia voters who cast ballots in November in the presidential election did not show up again for the Senate runoffs 2 months later on January 5th. As we know, those were two pretty tight races, and as they looked at the demographics and where those missing votes came from, northern Georgia and southern Georgia, generally very favorable to Republicans, saw a major drop-off. So it's almost guaranteed that that hurt David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, and definitely was a contributing factor to the Democrats controlling the U.S. Senate now. However, as the search for fraud continues, we do have one investigation going on in Georgia. And Jim, the writers of 2021 are really off to an aggressive start here. Lin Wood is being investigated for potential voter fraud, and that's because he has admitted to living in South Carolina for several months prior to the election and including the election. And the investigation is ongoing as to whether that made him an ineligible voter, which he said he was a voter in Georgia in November. And so if he's the only person they can find who was a fraud, there are probably others. But if he made this huge stink and is found out to be an illegal voter, it would be the perfect capstone to his lunacy and grift.
You know, Greg, I will observe that there have been a lot of really wild and crazy twists in, our political cycle over the last year or two. No one will really ever top the writers of 2020. I think the writers of 2021 are kind of reaching into the grab bag of cliches at this point, because how many times have we seen on Law and Order the person who's most fervently accusing somebody else of the crime was in fact the person who committed the crime? The guy who's screaming voter fraud, but he himself was committing voter fraud. It's not quite as surprising a twist as I necessarily think. Now, we should point out there are a lot of people who have residences in more than one state, and by itself, most states consider wherever you spend, I believe it's more than half the year, is where they consider you to be a resident. That's where you're supposed to be paying your state taxes to. And, more than an email will probably be needed. I think it'll be a question of where is he registered to vote? Did he vote in South Carolina? Can you prove he was spending more than half the year in there? So this, and look, when you are known for really going after state officials, some people are going to say, this is, payback or something like that. Look, if the evidence is there, they will indict him. If the evidence isn't there, they're not going to indict him. I think the bigger and more troubling and strange question is that Lin Wood comes along with this story of the election was stolen and your vote didn't count and the voting machine changed your vote or something. And so many people seem to believe him. So many people. And then when he said, don't vote in the Senate runoff elections, it appears some people heeded his words. It appears some people trusted him. And that's why Republicans lost. Now, it's a very narrow loss, particularly in that Perdue-Ossoff race. But, and when the margin is that close, you could point to a whole bunch of different factors. But I think having the president of the United States so completely focused on the notion that he had lost, and having these people who claim to be acting on behalf of the president running around saying the elections are rigged, that clearly didn't help Republicans get out the vote operations and enthusiasm. And that is a likely factor, probably a likely decisive factor in why Republicans are not in the majority in the Senate when they had a really excellent chance of keeping the control of the Senate after election night 2020.
Amazing. A guy who wasn't even on the political radar screen. He was obviously a famous attorney, has been for a number of years, but he just kind of parachuted in almost uninvited. I don't think Sidney Powell recruited him. I think he just volunteered to be a rabble-rouser in this whole thing, but he's the one who specifically said, don't you vote for them if they don't do exactly what we want to. We don't know how many people didn't vote because of that. There's usually a drop-off from a presidential race to any other race, and so we won't know exactly. But he certainly didn't help. And every time the Democrats managed to muscle something through in this 50-50 Senate with Harris as a tie-breaking vote, thank Lin Wood. He's definitely a contributing factor to all this.
Before we jump into the next topic, Greg, I just want to throw out, I'd seen this story a day or two ago, and it's confirmed in the bottom of most of the coverage of Lin Wood today. The Georgia State Bar asked him to take a mental health evaluation before they want. I guess they want to see the results of that before they decide on whether he should be able to continue practicing law in the state. We can make fun of him. I have a great deal of irritation and anger at Lin Wood. I think he has misled people. I think he has fogged up the discussion of the 2020 election. I think he lies. I think he makes up stuff that has no basis in reality. But I also recognize the possibility this guy might really have mental problems. He might really have lost touch with reality, and he may genuinely believe all of these cockamamie things that he's saying. I'm a little unnerved and surprised that there's nobody around him to say, hey, Lin, you're not making sense. Why don't you go talk to somebody? Why don't we get you checked out? Let's see if you've had a serious blow to the head in recent weeks or something like that. Because, he was not always this kind of way. And sometimes it not necessarily mean that he's going to do something as severe as the guy down in Tennessee who blew up downtown Nashville because he believed in lizard people. But you'd like to think that, if you begin saying things that sound utterly off your rocker, that somebody would pull you aside and say, we need to get you checked out. You don't sound right. You don't sound like yourself. You're in a bad place. So maybe this is some issue going on in Lin Wood's head, and we would be better off if this was, able to sort out that way. So as much as I'm angry at the guy, and I think he's been very harmful, not just to the Republican Party, but to the country as a whole and to our belief in our democratic system, maybe this is all a mental problem, and hopefully it can be all sorted out that way.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were cheering on Lin Wood because he was representing Nick Sandmann and the Covington Catholics as a result of all the horrible media coverage they got. And now Nick Sandmann's even fired Lin Wood. So a lot has changed here. All right, Jim, we do have good news, as I said, and that's that there is help for your student debt situation, thanks to Earnest, because, it's time to break out of the student debt cycle, and there are ways to make it easier. Earnest can help you by refinancing your student loan.
Earnest offers low-rate student loan refinancing, and you can check your rate risk-free in just 2 minutes. With Earnest, you get radically flexible payments, and you can pick your loan term. By refinancing, you can reduce your loan term, save money, or combine multiple loans into a simple monthly payment. And if you have questions, you can even talk to a real live human being at Earnest for help. Now, isn't it time you stopped feeling overwhelmed by your student debt?
And you know what? Interest rates are really low right now, so there might not be a better time to refinance. Check it out. Earnest is giving 3 Martini Lunch listeners a $100 bonus. Refinance your student loans at earnest.com/martini. Terms and conditions apply. Once again, you get a $100 cash bonus when you visit earnest.com/martini to refinance your student loan. Not available in all states. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Jim, we were just talking about Lin Wood and his possible break with reality. Well, there's a suggestion now from a New York Times writer that we need a reality czar. Yes, a reality czar. George Orwell is kicking himself for not coming up with that one. The writer's name is Kevin Roose, and he says that given all the misinformation that was out there about the election and maybe vaccines and other things, he says we've got to have a major counter effort to confront all this stuff. And so one thing is to assess the depth of the problem. Also, appointing a reality czar who would confront, and he even says it risks sounding a little dystopian, but he says there are experts out there, who say that the federal government's response to disinformation and domestic extremism is haphazard and spread across multiple agencies. And there's a lot of unnecessary overlap. And so I guess they want to streamline that. And further down, Jim, these experts supposedly suggest checking in on algorithms. So getting the government involved in how social media shows which posts and stuff show up in front of you. That shouldn't weird you out at all. In addition to everything else, Jim, it makes me smirk a little bit that these people like Kevin Roos only think misinformation comes from one side. I remember a whole lot of stuff during the riots last summer about how, American history was just filled with racists and we got to get rid of the founders and it's all just a big lie. And of course, if you go through the Democratic platform, I think if you had an honest reality czar, their entire agenda would run into big problems, from their climate agenda to their tax agenda to their healthcare agenda to a whole lot more, being confused on gender issues and everything else. So, Jim, what do you make of this push for a reality czar?
Well, my first thought, but I actually put this in a corner post yesterday, that anytime you've got some idea that you think is terrific, but requires you to write, quote, "This sounds a little dystopian, I'll grant, but let's hear them out." It's a sign you've made a terrible wrong turn. You need to stop, take a deep breath, get up from, step away from the computer, maybe go for a little walk, just trying to clear your head and rethink whether it's really that good idea. Because if you're finding, okay, this sounds dystopian, but people aren't going to, it's the old saying that everything before the but doesn't really count. This good ideas don't sound dystopian. Good ideas generally sound pretty good. Second thing is that, look, the two examples they keep citing in this are the QAnon conspiracy theory and the belief that Trump won the election and that the election results were altered by Venezuelan hackers or something like that. Both of these amount to a distrust of government. The idea that President Biden appointing some reality czar, heading up a federal government effort, a coordinated federal government effort to stamp out disinformation, is not going to increase trust in the government, right? There's not a lot that the government can do to make people who don't trust it better, other than behave better, other than be more honest. Don't get caught in lies. And that includes noble lies. I'm not so sure we would have the issue with masks that we have today if there had not been the effort to tell people not to wear masks in the very first weeks of this pandemic. Allegedly, they had the very best of intentions. They were really worried about masks running out for doctors and surgeons and nurses and everyone who had to deal with the people who were going to the hospitals with the virus. It's understandable they felt that way. But when your initial message was, no, you don't need to wear a mask. You don't need to get a mask. Masks don't work. And then a couple of weeks later, you're like, oh, no, they really do work. And everyone should start wearing them all the time. It's not surprising that some people, they remember the first message and they either disregard the second message or they're not sure about the second message. And even folks like Anthony Fauci made this error. Maybe they had the very best of intentions, but anytime, noble lies are still lies. And, once you get caught in those lies, you undermine the trust in that. Now, I got to tell you, if you believe in QAnon, I don't think there's any federal panel, blue ribbon commission, or any other type of government agency that's going to be able to get you to change your mind or change your beliefs. I do also think that, again, we're the government and we're going to go out and we're going to go onto social media to make sure that people aren't lying, and the reality czar will be the one who determines what's real. That's just feeding into people's paranoia. That's about if you wanted to make people more paranoid about the government becoming more Orwellian and controlling speech, that's what you do. Well, here's the thing. I was trying to think, what would be worse? And the only thing I could possibly come up with, Greg, is that you figured out a way to undermine people's feelings of paranoia through mind-altering chemicals, and you're going to distribute them through chemtrails. That's how we're going to take care of it. That wouldn't feed paranoia.
Well, no, but I don't think we can let the media off the hook here either, because while the government does lie all the time, or at least on a fairly regular basis, the media is constantly forcing a scripted drumbeat too, whereas every story has to have a villain, and that villain for 4 years, maybe 5, was Donald Trump. If it's not Trump, it's Republicans in some fashion. And it's just constant. No matter what the story was, there had to be a bad guy, whether it's Trump or somebody else. And so when that's happening, it also, in conjunction with all the mistruths, half-truths, and outright lies coming from government, feeds the same problem.
Yeah. Again, if fact-checking has become something that kind of spurs eye-rolling in a lot of conservative circles, and it is not, as liberals believe, that conservatives hate facts or something like that. So we've seen all the times that the truth on these sorts of things gets shaded slightly. And they say, well, it's true, but it lacks context or something like that. Fact-checking is unfortunately, there are good fact-checkers out there and there are not so good fact-checkers out there. And there are some terrible fact-checkers out there. But the same bias or tendency to give Democrats the benefit of the doubt and to never give any excusing or to give any inch to Republicans. That same mentality is at work in certain fact checkers as much as the other guys. I mean, you see institutions like Facebook saying, no, don't worry. We've hired Media Matters for America to be our fact checker. It's, you should not be surprised that you end up with greater, mistrust and distrust on the parts of conservatives and stuff. I mean, like, part of this requires a good faith effort to listen to conservatives. And the more you shut out. The more you freak out about, say, Ben Shapiro guest writing playbook, the more people will think, oh, okay, so the media has no interest in listening to conservatives at all. Everything they give me is propaganda. Everything is designed to support one viewpoint. If you had more conservatives in the mainstream media dialogue, you probably would have conservatives would be less likely to see themselves as outsiders who can't trust anything they're hearing from a mainstream source.
The left has had a big role in creating all this, and they assume no responsibility whatsoever.
Hey guys, it's Mock and Daisy from the Chicks on the Right, and we're excited to tell you about our podcast, the Mock and Daisy Common Sense Cast.
If you've been stressed lately with the information overload on social media or just don't feel like anything in the news makes sense anymore, don't worry, because we're here to clear things up.
Every week, we discuss topics like cancel culture, national crisis, what's happening to our new generations, and if you're just plain tired of people trying to tell you what to do or how to live your life, we tackle that too.
Find out more by going to our website, chicksontheright.com, or start listening on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to leave a comment or review and subscribe.
Now, Jim, eventually, and perhaps sometime soon, we can kind of eliminate the middleman. We won't need a reality czar because the computers can just correct us in real time. Let's go to our third crazy martini now, and Elon Musk. Elon Musk is an interesting guy. We like a lot of things he does. I'm ambivalent on Teslas. They're way too expensive. We're fascinated with SpaceX and the launches that they've had and the reusable boosters and the boosters landing on these specific pads and so forth, and space tourism possibly picking up eventually. All of those visionary things are worthy of interest. Now he's entering a different area, and I guess he has been for a while now. This is from The Hill. Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk says his brain-computer interface startup, Neuralink, could kick off human trials as early as this year, quote-unquote, if things go well. The San Francisco Bay Area-based startup, co-founded by Musk in 2016, is aiming to implant a computer interface in the human brain to help treat neurological conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia, and spinal cord injuries. That sounds a little iffy right now, but you're saying, okay, maybe there can be a use for that. But then it says, in the long term, the company is looking to achieve a degree of symbiosis between humans and artificial intelligence. So, Jim, I don't know if you've ever dreamed of being the Borg, but I guess depending on who controls this stuff, this is a little bit fascinating, especially on the medical front. But once you get on to symbiotic relationships with artificial intelligence, I think we've gone past the looking glass here.
What could go wrong, Skynet? So I guess on his best days, Elon Musk is probably about as close as we're going to get in the real world to somebody like Tony Stark, right? This Iron Man genius who comes up with innovative new ideas that feels like it's bringing the future to us today. The problem is on his bad days, Elon Musk sounds like a bad scientist. And he sounds like we're just, one bad day away from him creating Frankenstein or some other, giant robot smashing across the landscape or something like that. Look, if this can work wonders for people with paralysis or spinal cord issues, God bless them. That's great. And I suppose that part of the process of innovation is exploring directions that some people might not be comfortable with. It's a little bit of a segue, but I'm just going to describe. I remember being at a conference years ago and listening to a guy who was a very, very bright scientist. And we were, I don't know how the heck we got on it, but I guess we're talking about meat and veganism and all that kind of stuff. And he observed that almost any protein, the technology is now advanced that you can grow it in a vat. You could create steak in a petri dish. You wouldn't need to have it, coming from a cow. And I had mixed feelings about that. But then he pointed out that theoretically you could then do this for all kinds of human tissues. And that'd be really great for healing people. If you could grow some new organ from a sample and grow a healthy one and replace one that's got a disease or something like that. He pointed out, though, that there are all kinds of applications to this, including, he pointed out, legal consumption of human flesh. Now, this is the kind of point where do I want to continue having this conversation with this guy? This conversation is just taking an odd and disturbing turn. But theoretically, you take your own DNA, you grow tissue, and then you could legally consume human flesh because it's not like you cut it out of anybody. It's not like it was grown in a test tube and you could see what you taste like. This is why people do, like, I know scientists feel like they sometimes get a bad rap, but when they come up with ideas like this, who can be surprised, right? Who can be that shocked that people look at scientists and our stereotype is the guy with the crazy hair coming out in the white coat and, Doc Brown from Back to the Future and stuff like that. Look, interfacing with computers, Greg, the phone isn't enough. Really? We're not interfacing with the internet all the time? I thought if you think pop-up ads on National Review are bad, just wait until they start popping up in your mind.
Yeah, you won't have to look at the screen anymore, I guess. It also says that Musk revealed during an interview on the private social app Clubhouse that Neuralink put a wireless implant in a monkey's brain that allowed the animal to play video games using only its mind. So that's disturbing in and of itself. And Jim, you mentioned how he's kind of like Tony Stark. You know what happens when people who come up with really radical ideas feel disrespected? They become supervillains. So
that's right. Everybody be nice to Elon this week.
You don't have to get your brain chip implanted, but just got to pat him on the head and move on, maybe. If he feels disrespected, who knows? We might be soon facing an army of cyborg monkeys or something.
Yeah. Hey, Joe Rogan, do you have anything that can relax this guy? Let's all stay on Elon's good side this week.
You thought the first two martinis were crazy. Wow, that definitely closes it out for today. Jim, as of tomorrow, I think our brains will still be our own, but we'll find out. Talk to you then. And
listeners, not only can you get us on all of your audio devices, soon we'll be coming directly into your brains. Until then, you'll just have to listen to our podcast.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget about our friends over at Earnest, earnest.com/martini. Also, please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. We are very grateful for your kind reviews and your 5-star ratings. Remember, you can get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Find us on Twitter. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday, and please join us Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.